Thanks very much.
Thank you. I just try to share my screen. One moment, please. Yeah, do you see the screen?
Yep, good.
Yeah, I can see that fine, thanks.
Perfect. So yeah, let's start. Thanks a lot for the invitation and for hosting and for the possibility to discuss my research with you. Yeah, today I want to share a research on learning analytics, which is still work in progress. So I can share you theoretical ideas and first findings of this project. I'm working on this research together with a colleague from the University of Graz. It's also in Austria, with Sylvia Lipp is the name of her. Yeah. And the background story of this project, just shortly, is that the Technical University in Graz designed a learning analytics application and dashboard for 2 master's courses of the master's program, Business Education. And I worked there together with Sylvia last year. So for 1 year I worked there. And we had the idea to look at this learning analytics framework and dashboard from a critical perspective, as we recognized that the researchers from the Technical University and also most of the literature on this topic is quite positive and affirmative. So they try to implement this new technology in the best possible way. And yeah, we thought we are interested how the use of this technical tool affects learner thinking and behaving. And we look at this phenomenon from an algorithmic governmentality perspective, which is inspired by Michel Foucault, by his concept of governmentality. Yeah, so one moment. In the next about 40 minutes, I will give you a short introduction into this topic. I will explain you our theoretical perspective, the research question we are aiming for, and the research setting. Then I will really briefly explain the research design and first findings of our project. And finally, I will draw some final conclusions, and I'm looking forward to discuss this topic with you and also our research project. So let's start with the introduction. What is learning analytics? So the Society for Learning Analytics Research, in short SOLA, defined the term learning analytics ahead for the first International Learning Analytics Conference in Alberta, Canada. And they defined the term as follows. Learning analytics is the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about learners and their context for purposes of understanding and optimizing learning and the environment in which it occurs. So this definition is quite important because it was the first official one, and it's still dominant today in research and practice. For example, in Austria, the Forum New Media in Teaching defined learning analytics following this original definition and puts the focus more on the learner. So actual definitions specify this definition. And in the moment, yeah, the learner is at the focus in the center because the 2 people which I'm citing are from the University of Graz, Leitner and Ebner, and they argue that learners should be enabled to immediately modify their learning, and they should directly benefit from their data. So that's the goal from learning analytics. And not only this white paper from this forum, New Media in Teaching, but also the huge amount of literature on learning analytics shows that this topic has become increasingly important in research and practice in the field of education. And some leading figures of this research community are even predicting a coming era of learning analytics. So let's look at the previous research, and the previous research is predominantly technically oriented and primarily focused on higher education so far, and it includes aspects such as how can we increase learner success or decrease dropouts through learning analytics applications? How can we increase motivation? How can we stimulate reflection? How can we give data-based process-oriented feedback? Or how can we enhance self-regulated learning? So these are a lot of aspects in learning. Interesting is that there is a lack of pedagogical grounding in most of this research. So for example, a literature review, a systematic literature review on this topic by Matcha et al. Shows that 69% of all research they analyzed on learning analytics dashboards has no pedagogical theory explicitly mentioned. That's quite interesting, I think. Another thing is that even learning is not always in the focus of learning analytics research. As you see, the two papers I show you here on the right side are from really important people from this research community. For example, Dragan Gašević is one of the founders of this research community. And also Dirk Eventhaler from Germany is really a prominent researcher. And you see from the title, they say, let's not forget learning analytics are about learning or putting learning back into learning analytics, which means most of the time even learning is forgotten in learning analytics research, which is for me very interesting. Another thing is that so far there is little empirical evidence on the effects of learning analytics. So that learning analytics improves learning outcomes and increases student success. Nevertheless, most publications are largely affirmative, and they are concerned with the most effective implementation of learning analytics systems at all levels of education. Criticism is mostly reduced to privacy, data literacy, or usability issues. However, there is also critical research, but more on the general topic of learning technologies. And one stream or one research field is called critical data studies. Here on the right, you see one example. An important publication in this field, and central aspects of the criticism of critical data studies are, first of all, that data are not neutral and depoliticized or objective representations of reality, because data are constructions about the world and thus serve specific interests. But often, especially in learning technologies, they are sold as neutral and objective technologies. Secondly, the authors in this field argue that data processing procedures are significant and highly powerful social practices. For example, processes of observing, of measuring, of describing, of classifying, of sorting, of ordering, of ranking. All these things represent a certain idea of reality that has an influence on people's ways of thinking and behaving. And third, but not least, is the critique on the reductionist nature of educational data, which means if you capture educational events or learning activities with digital data, some things are excluded and some things included. So aspects of learning, some aspects are better captured than others. Some of them are not possible to capture. So the question following Selvin is what is not covered? So what exclusions exist in the way education is shown through digital data? And I think, this research field is very interesting, and we are inspired by this research. The overall overarching aim of critical data studies is to enhance a critical discussion of social processes of data use. And a lot or most of these researchers in this field argue that there is a lack of empirical studies on the effects of data practices in education. And they say there is a need for further research in education in this field. And we aim to do that. And we look at learning analytics and these social processes from a specific theoretical perspective. And I will want to quite briefly introduce you into this theoretical perspective. And in our opinion, the concept of algorithmic governmentality is a suitable theoretical lens for investigating specific practices of governance and self-governance that emerge by the use and application of learning analytics systems and architectures. This concept originates from Antoinette Rovreux and Thomas Burns. Both are philosophers, and they are professors of political philosophy and philosophy of law at the University of Brussels. And this concept has been used and adapted also in other fields, not just in philosophy of law. For example, in organizational research, Weisskopf and Hansen used this concept to study people analytics. For example, facial recognition in organizational research. So this perspective, algorithmic governmentality, takes up the governmentality concept from Foucault and extends it to the special rationalities and logics of digital technologies. And just shortly, one slide, what does governmentality means? So what is governmentality? And Foucault developed this concept. So we are speaking about the French philosopher and historian Michel Foucault. And he developed this concept in the late 70s in his lectures. And these lectures are published in the book Security, Territory, and Population. He developed this concept to refine his analysis of power. And governmentality, by governmentality, Foucault refers to a particular form of power that neither directly nor immediately affects others, nor operates by means of coercion, force, or violence. This form of power aims to guide the actions of individuals and groups in more subtle and indirect ways to make certain ways of behaving and being more likely than others. So it does not operate through discipline or surveillance, but through probabilities and perceived freedom. The term governmentality can be understood following Foucault as the set of institutions and practices from administration to education. So he defines it quite general, through which people's conduct is guided. And governmentality serves as analytical perspective to study the ways of conducting the conduct of people. And Rovreux and Burns build on these ideas of Foucault and define the concept of algorithmic governmentality as follows. It's a certain type of anormative and apolitical rationality founded on the automated collection, aggregation, and analysis of big data, so as to model, anticipate, and preemptively affect possible behavior. And Rovreux and Burns argue that this form of guidance of behaviors is insofar problematic as it claims to be fundamentally harmless and completely objective, because it refers to a reality that is grounded in the statistical processing of data traces, and thus is apparently free of social norms and free of political interests. However, algorithmic governance creates a certain version of social reality. It makes worlds and thus structures social practices. In doing so, it does not act in a value-neutral way, but makes certain things visible and others invisible. Thus, it's normalizing certain versions of reality. In this way, it has a significant impact on how we perceive the world and how we act in it. So algorithmic governmentality aims to reduce uncertainty, or like as Rovreux says, it aims to reduce the possible to the probable. By influencing behaviors through warnings rather than prohibitions or obligations. And this is not just about, so this is really important, it's not just about monitoring, about judging or evaluating past behavior. It's also about directing people's attention to certain things so that in future certain behavior become more likely than other behavior. Overall, algorithmic governmentality creates normative expectations of how, in our case, students should behave and understand themselves, thus shaping the field of possibilities of potential future ways of being and behaving. As mentioned, Weisskopf and Hansen, through scholars in organizational research, describe three central aspects of algorithmic governmentality, which is quite interesting. And our focus of our study is on the third aspect, on specific forms of subjectivation. But all three of these aspects for sure are interrelated and influence each other. So I just briefly explain these three aspects. The first one is are specific forms of objectivation. And objectivation is the process by which people and their experiences are transformed digitally into an object of knowledge. This means that algorithms not only carry out instructions, they act performatively by analyzing and representing data. They are producing particular objects of knowledge. In education, for example, through profiles, through rankings, ranking scores, and through performance. Maybe you know the term data doubles. where people are digitally transformed into a data object, which reduces the complexity of reality and produces a new, different kind of reality or existence. And this has effects on subjectivation processes of people. So that's the first thing. So objects of knowledge are produced through algorithmic governmentality. The second thing is human reflexivity is increasingly removed from processes of categorization. That means basically algorithms use categories which are programmed by humans to make decisions. But as these decision-making processes become more and more complex, for example, through machine learning, it is not always comprehensible, even by the programmers of this software, why certain categories are used and others not. So as Indrona says, they become black boxes even to their designers. The third aspect are specific forms of subjectivation, which is our focus. Generally speaking, subjectivation can be interpreted as modes of practically dealing with the normative expectations, for example, set by learning analytics software, regarding the ways people should be and act. And these modes influence and transform the relation to oneself and to others. Algorithmic governmentality seeks to implicitly align subjects' behavior with particular standards and notions of normality, so that actions become measurable and comparable. However, these modes of subjectivation are potentially multi-layered. That means they can range from adjusting oneself with these normative expectations to questioning certain standards and norms and acts of resistance. And that's what's interesting for us in our study. And so the research question of our study is as follows. How does the use of learning analytics in VET teacher education shape students' modes of subjectivation? So our field is vocational education and training, in particular the Masters of Business Education at high school, at the university. So our special interest is the analysis of governance mechanisms and the performative nature of learning analytic systems in relation to students' ways of being and behaving. So further guiding questions are, on the one hand, in which ways is the learning analytics architecture structuring the possible field of action of students and thereby influencing their subjectivation processes? And on the other hand, in which ways do students refer to the normative specifications, constraints, and expectations of learning analytics architecture within their self-interpretations and self-descriptions? So we are using a qualitative approach to answer these research questions. Before I'm describing our research design, I want to present you the research setting, or outline the research setting. That means the environment where this learning analytics architecture has placed into practice, has been implemented. And I outline the research setting according to the topologies of data practices by De Kuiper. These topologies are ecology, design, interface, and usage. And as you see at this graph at the right hand, they are interrelated. I mean, De Kuiper says it's possible, or it would be good to analyze all of these topologies, but we focus on the usage of the students, but we use these topologies just to describe the research setting. So how is the ecology? So the environment in which the learning analytics architecture is embedded. First of all, as described before, the learning analytics application under investigation was developed by researchers of the Technical University Graz and as part of a greater research project. Our study focuses on 2 courses of the master's program, Business Education and Development. It's a 5-semester master's program. One course under investigation is the course Didactics in Business Education, which is in the beginning of the 5 semesters. And another one, Entrepreneurship Education and Business Ethics, is in the middle of the master's program. And both courses are seminars in a blended learning setting. Courses use the learning management system Moodle for their digital learning space. And both courses are conceptualized in such a way that many learning activities take place online, and also that parts of the formative and summative assessments take online. So the learning environment is therefore well suited for this learning analytics application. But how is this learning analytics application designed? So really roughly, the 2 online courses operate on a special Moodle version called Learn Moodle, which allows to program additional applications to Moodle. Both courses are based on a digital media education design called Learning Environment Concept by Tulodziecki, Grefe, and Herzig. So it's a special learning media design. And the aim of this learning analytics application and dashboard is real-time support for students, especially in the self-learning phases. And to do this, on the one hand, interaction data is gathered and analyzed. For example, duration and frequency of online activities of the students. And on the other hand, also content data, so answers in online quizzes, for example. And a part of this measured and analyzed data is visualized in real time on a special designed dashboard, an online interface. Here you see the interface. On the left side, it's the standard Learn Moodle interface. You see different learning possibilities. I'm sorry, that's in German, but it's just that you see how it looks like. In the middle, you see compulsory learning activities. Here on the right, voluntary learning activities. Here, the learning analytics dashboard. Here you see exams and other things. I think important is that on the one hand, they are not only compulsory, but also voluntary learning tasks. And through accomplishing these voluntary learning tasks, students gain experience points and advance in learning levels. As you see here in the middle, you get badges and stars. And this is based on a gamification approach. Students can see the level compared to their peers, and should be motivated through this. Everything what I explained so far from the design is still possible in Moodle Learn. The programmed dashboard you see on the right side is on the upper right side. This speedometer, and it should enable students view their learning progress in real time, and similar to adjusting one's driving style when driving a car. With the help of the speedometer, students should be able to adjust their learning behavior. This visualization allows them to see their own score. So the yellow one is their own score, the average peer score, and the highest peer score. And they can also filter here by aspects of the grade, so that they can see to what extent they still have room for improvement. Another special designed application is the planner, which you see on the bottom right. The planner is a tool that maps all learning activities in these courses and tells the students what they have to do and when they should do it. The colors signal due dates. So red is due. And these task bubbles are also associated with automated notifications. So when assignment is due, so students get notified by email, you have to do this. Within the next 24 hours or something like that. So, yeah, that's it. So it's quite basic. But I think it's interesting to look on the effects on students. So the usage is the last topology, and for sure there are different stakeholders who could use this data, but our focus, as said, is on the students. So what's the research design about? Just really briefly, as I said, it's still work in progress. We are now in the analysis phase. So we are just analyzing data. And as you see, we started with collecting data in winter semester 2020-2021. And it's the semester when this learning analytics application was implemented. So we started from the beginning. Every semester, you see how many students attended courses with this application. And every semester, we collected data. So in the beginning, 3 group interviews, second semester, 6 group interviews, like focus group interviews. In the third semester, also individual interviews, which took about 60 minutes. And 2 group interviews. And in the summer term 22, we collected 57 learning journals where students wrote down their experiences with the learning analytics dashboard during the whole semester. So in total, we have data from 103 students. And this tool is still used there, so we could get further data if it's necessary. I think, yeah. But now we have a lot of data, and we have to analyze everything. So it's work in progress. Today, I will just show you a small bit of this data. We already analyzed the 12 individual interviews, and we inductively generated categories and central major themes based on the semantic analysis approach by Brown and Clark. And that's what I want to show you in the last about 10 minutes. So the first findings. Here you see again the research question and 5 central themes which we generated by this semantic analysis approach. And these themes, we describe these themes as modes of subjectivation, but we are still thinking about how we could describe them best. So I will explain you these 5 themes with some examples. The first theme shows that the use of learning analytics leads to students experiencing increased self-determination and self-direction in learning. They feel that they are now more responsible and self-determined in their own learning process, which is quite interesting. As you see in the examples, the students say, yeah, I'm a bit more stimulated to deal with myself, to see this as my responsibility and to give less attention to the teachers, because the system tells me what to do and not the teacher. So I think it's really interesting that they trusted the system more than the teacher and think then they are more responsible because they are following the system. Another student says, yeah, now the control is more put in my hands, because often it's like a black box and you feel that the teacher sits in his room, his conference room, and awards points as they like. But now this learning management system is relatively transparent and gives more power to the learner. Again, the student from the first example says also, I feel that it's my own space in which I work, that I can influence what it looks like. So the students believe they are now more responsible for their learning and even more self-directed in learning. The second theme shows that the use of learning analytics motivates students to optimize their learning and even their performance along predefined pathways. So for example, one student says, it's interesting what this dashboard tells us, but it would be more interesting that the system shows us where we can personally improve and where can optimize and develop ourselves. The second student says, yeah, if I know that I'm below average, then I would just try harder next time. Maybe I did too little, and so I would look in there, the student means in the system, where I can improve. So there is again this feeling of responsibility, and the system gives us the possibility to improve and shows the students where they should direct their learning. Another student mentions this gamification approach and says, yeah, this gamification actually affected me and encouraged me because I just didn't want to stay behind. The third theme shows that the students align their behavior according to normality criteria established by the learning analytics system. So they align their behavior according to comparisons with other students and to the average score. Interesting here is that the students perceive the average score as the normal or normality, and they make a very strong distinction between good and bad students. So students who deviate from this average or norm. So the system specifies what is a good student and what is a best student. One person, for example, says, because you have the absolute comparison, what are the others doing compared to me? And it changes something in you. I think that's amazing. Another student says, it's definitely motivating, and there's also the dashboard that shows you how many points I currently have and how many points the average student has. But if you are worse than average, it can also be demotivating. But the student says, in the end, I'm always better than the average, so it's definitely motivating. And the third student is also problematizing this demotivation possibility and says it could be that I'm very discouraged because I see clearly that I'm much worse than the other students. And this potentially leads to an increase of educational inequality because students who are better than average from the beginning on are more motivated, and students who are lower than average are potentially discouraged and demotivated. The fourth theme is an ambivalent theme. We called it trust in assumed objectivity of the learning analytics black box, because you see two different argumentations, but which I think go together. The first thing is that some of the interviewed students do not exactly know how the system proceeds. For example, this first quote shows that one student says, I have concerns in the sense of how the score is actually calculated. And I would simply have been interested in how the score is calculated and if you can trust the system. At the same time, most of the interviewed students still trust in the system, at least more than they trust in the teachers, because they think the system is more objective and neutral. So one student says, yeah, the feedback from the computer is probably more objective because we cannot be objective. We are humans. Another student says, everyone gets the same points for the same performance. No one is favored now. That means before it was not so. And only the facts they have been entered into the system count. So I think, yeah, that's also a really interesting theme. And the last one we called impulse-driven circumvention of reflection, which shows that the learning analytics application makes students very responsive to stimuli and impulses set by the system, such as automated notifications or real-time feedback from this system. You see that in the first two quotations. This impulse control or the reaction to the alerting by the system shows up here very strongly. For example, both persons support these automated notifications because they have the fear that otherwise they could miss something. So the first student says, yeah, to receive emails from the system is a great possibility because maybe something gets lost. You no longer have an overview of everything. You have seen this planner. There are really a lot of bubbles. And the student says, if you get then an email notification that something is due, you start to panic and immediately check whether you have really done everything. And another student says, at least in the beginning, I had the feeling that I didn't have everything under control, and I was afraid that I still had to click somewhere on this Learn Moodle and that I had overlooked some sections. So this is really interesting because the first theme was on they feel they have more control, more self-direction. They are more responsible for their own learning. And here students show they think they have nothing under control and they need the alerts from the system and the structuring from the system. Interesting is that the student from the first quote also problematizes this real-time feedback in the third quote and says these quizzes, this real-time feedback you get just goes too fast because the points are displayed immediately. And I think that a certain distance in between would be good so that you can think about it more. Because if you get the points right after, it's done so quickly that you don't even think about it carefully anymore. So we see there in the data a reduction of possible reflection of students. And the last quote I didn't have on the slides, which is really interesting, I think, is one student told us, now she don't has to go in the library anymore, because now the system shows her what she should do to get better in the scoring. So that's really convenient because it's easier to study now. That's it with our first findings. I have a last slide just to sum up and some final thoughts. Overall, the initial findings of our study illustrate that the students are guided in their thinking and acting by learning analytics, not through coercion or force, but more in subtle and indirect ways. Or like Robert said, this learning analytics application seeks to reduce the possible to the probable. By interacting with this dashboard, the students apparently voluntarily adapt their own behavior to the normatively prescribed standards, so to the norms prescribed by learning analytics. So they become data-driven learner subjects. Thereby, students' modes of subjectivation are shaped in a specific way and guided in a certain direction. For example, by trusting in the supposed objectivity and neutrality of data, and through the data tables, which are generated by the system from these online activities, students are placed in a digitally generated state of competition. They aim to improve their own ranking, and they are motivated to adapt their behavior to what the system tells them. Also, the gamification elements and the real-time feedback have a regulating effect on the student's behavior. So our study shows that by implementing learning analytics applications, subjectivation processes take place through the restriction and avoidance of reflexivity and an activation of self-governance. So students are subtly guided, react to stimuli and impulses, want to optimize themselves along the given pathways of the system, so they align their behavior with the pre-structured system. Overall, this leads to a limitation of the room for maneuver and the possibility of critical thinking. Through the use of learning analytics, however, not only mechanisms of closure emerge, there's also a possibility of opening. So when we work, or when students work with this learning analytics tool, this offers opportunities also for critical questioning. So it creates the opportunity to think how this data, these rankings, these comparisons are created. What is the ranking telling you? So what is included in this data? What is excluded? Are there any biases in this data? So it also offers potential for problematizing the powerful effects that result from the use of digital technologies. But in my opinion, this requires pedagogical support and the promotion of critical reflection on the use of digital technologies in higher education. So thank you for the attention, and I'm looking forward to some questions and a discussion. Yeah, here are the references. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Hannes. That was really interesting, really insightful. A lot to unpack there. I think it was really good. We've got a hand up. That's Elena. Hi, Elena. Question from Elena. You're on mute.
Thank
there,
you.
Elena.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the presentation. So excellent research project. I just wonder if you had a chance to look at student performance. It might be early stages, but you had 3 cohorts. Did it impact on their performance, on their marks at all? Usage of the system.
I don't think so, but we didn't look at it. So our project was just on the views of the students, so on their self-descriptions and what they are thinking is going on. But we didn't look at like if it has effects on learning success. I'm sorry.
No worries. No, it just would be really interesting to see. I mean, even comparing not necessarily individual students, but cohorts in terms of their averages, perhaps. So if averages for on the dashboard are growing, and if it's in terms of cohort average for specific module or course, how you called it, is it changing at all or not?
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think so, but yeah, I think we have the possibility to prove that.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your comment.
Thank you.
Any other questions there? Anyone like to jump in? I thought there was some really insightful quotes from the students. The brilliant one was about someone saying, you know, if you're below average, that can be quite demotivating. I was thinking that doesn't bode well for half the students in the cohort, does it? You know, if you're in that, if you're in the below average category, yeah. So, and the other one that I really thought was interesting was the idea that the students were quite happy to be subjectified, relative to the algorithmic decision making, so long as the tutor was kind of subjectified or had the power stripped from them in that decision making. I thought that was very like they would accept that to sort of redress the asymmetry of power between the students. So there's like a three-way interplay of power there, and the students were kind of favoring the algorithm ahead of the tutor, which was very interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I think this is really rare. And the funny thing is in this project, in the two courses, a part of the grades or the points for the score is typed in by the tutors. So because they have not only online quizzes or exams or grading, so they have also offline grading, and the tutors type the offline grading in the system. And the funny thing is the students say now it's more objective, even if they know, I mean,
yeah,
2/3 of the grade is just typed in by the tutors, so it's it's graded by the same people. But yeah, that's really interesting, because I showed our study to 2 of these tutors, and they couldn't believe that students say, now it's more objective.
yeah.
They are saying it's nearly similar than before. So how can they do that? But how can they say that?
Brilliant.
Yeah, and I think the students, this is the kind of governmentality or self-governance. I think it's really interesting that the students believe they are now they act now more responsible and more self-directed, because they are using now the system, but they don't realize that the system is shaping them and directing them in specific ways.
Yeah.
So they're just thinking teachers are doing that, but they are not thinking that the system also frames their behaving. And I think that's really interesting, and also shocking for me.
Yeah, it's a dangerous trust, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Damien, go ahead.
Well, yeah, just to say, really, really interesting presentation. There's so much there, and I think it's quite timely now, because especially, you know, we're going through this situation where we are now in the academic year, and even today I sat down with a student and she wanted to know whether her attendance was above average or below average, which I thought was really interesting. And it does kind of lead into this thing about whether, you know, it's the case of you being chased by a bear. You don't have to be quicker than the bear. You just don't have to be the slowest person in the group, if you know what I mean. So, but I thought, and again, about the idea about the students' expectations, about they're setting the average, but how that average relates to the institutional expectations and the actual, in terms of attainment, I thought is a really, really interesting question, especially in terms of how you could use that average as you said before, it can be used almost as a carrot or a stick, whether people are above or below, but how the data could be used to let the student, in relation to other people's expectations, possibly not just their own. For example, the students' expectations of how they're doing and and I guess that's what I find really interesting about this, because especially when you talked about the students being directed and their idea of motivation, but that motivation is kind of insular. It's not looking outwards, is it, in relation to what other people are doing possibly. One other just point, it's not a question, was I noticed you did this in terms of business studies, and that's quite a topic which I think quantitative data is used quite a lot in that. So the students might be predisposed to accepting that and seeing themselves in terms of numbers and things like that and data. And I was wondering if what you think about how this could transfer, or maybe the impact that this would have on other topics, maybe more in the social sciences.
I think, yeah, that's the question. I'm not sure. I mean, this is a master's in business education.
Right.
So the students, after their master's degree, they can teach at colleges. So they become teachers for business subjects. So they are teaching, for example, accounting, different marketing, different business subjects at the college, at secondary, upper secondary level. So these are becoming teachers. So for me, teachers, even if they are teachers for economics or business, they should be reflective on things like that. But I don't know how it would be, I don't know, in other social sciences. I don't know if it would be really different. I'm not sure. I don't have any experiences. Yeah, maybe they like numbers more.
Yeah.
That would be.
Thanks, Damien. So there's a comment in the chat from Craig saying, totally agree, Ari, the governmental aspects of data analytics imposing a mechanism of data-driven performativity. So yeah, I think that speaks to what you've been saying there, Damien and Hannes. I've got a hand up from Sarah.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I was kind of coming at it from the same angle as Damien, just thinking about the world of business as a very competitive sort of world, perhaps in ways that, other areas of study might not be. But would you say that there is a possibility that students could in effect play the system? So to kind of, if they are happy to pass, to be average, and just to kind of tick along and use that to gauge how much effort is needed in order to achieve what they want for them personally, without necessarily being concerned about being, in the top 5% or whatever.
You mean how they use it to? Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, what the data shows, they want to be better than average for sure, and that's something which is guiding them because of the system. Otherwise, for sure, they have grades, and maybe then they say, okay, we have 5 grades in Austria, so average is 3. So we have 1 is the best, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they aim to have a 1 or 2 grades. So it could be similar, but I think through this system, they are more framed because they see in real time, and in every moment they want, they can go online and look at the score, and they have next to this score also this ranking system with these voluntary learning activities. So with the stars, they can reach, I think, about 20 levels. And they also see, oh, other students have already 10 levels. I have only 8 levels. So I think this system, even it's already in the education system at all, like grading, comparing. Some students said we compared even before. So we always comparing grades and looking who is better. Even if this is in our educational system, I think this learning analytics tool is increasing this competition and this comparing and this looking, am I better than average? I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much. And thank you for a really interesting presentation too.
Thanks a lot.
I think as well, further to that point that Sarah's made around that idea of, you know, getting yourself to that level where you feel you should be at. There's also that idea of like predictive analytics now and almost like a sorting process where the system is telling you where you should be going as well, you know, and it's even less of a conscious decision made by the individual, by the student as well. So I think it's, yeah, very, very interesting.
Even just one point to add, some of the students, like I showed one example, are they want more guidance by the system. So they say, okay, now we have this scoring, the speedometer, but I want to know by the system where I personally can improve and optimize my performance. So I think there are possibilities. We don't have it in our project, but it's possible to guide students more by showing them, okay, in this aspect or in this topic, you are underperformed, so you should read this or you should do this quiz. I think there is a lot more possible than we have in our project. And that's also, I mean, that's scary for me, because in the end, you are guided through a system, what you should learn and how you perform best.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a quote in the chat from David saying, as a lecturer in critical criminology, it would be my duty to ensure my students were equipped to critique the system of algorithmic governmentality and to identify the ideology driving it. I think that's really important, isn't it? To ensure students are equipped to really interpret what these algorithms are doing. You know, that's interesting because it requires critical thinking, but also maybe understanding the mechanics of the algorithm itself, isn't it, as well? You know, you've got to understand the sort of sociology of the bias of the designer, but actually what that algorithm is then doing. So there's almost like a technical bridge to cross as well in terms of that understanding. So very interesting.
Exactly.
Craig's got to go as well now, and Damien has to leave as well. So is there any more questions, or should we call time on that there? Yeah, I think that's it for the questions. But thanks again, Hannes, for a really, really interesting, insightful presentation. I look forward to seeing the future directions of the research. So thanks everyone for coming along.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a lot for coming along and for attending my presentation and for the possibility, for sure.
Thanks again. Cheers.
Cheers. So see you.